Okay, let's unpack this. It's a pretty fascinating moment globally, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. You've got these two really powerful American figures rising sort of in parallel on the world stage.
Right. One deep in politics, obviously, and the other now leading, well, a major global religion.
And the scale is just immense. I mean, the president of the U.S., a superpower, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Pope, spiritual guide for, 1.4 billion Catholics?
It's genuinely unprecedented. Two Americans in those specific roles at the same time.
Exactly.
So for this deep dive, we've gathered quite a bit of material. We've got news reports, the News-Gazette, The Independent, some business takes from business outstanders, the Daily Beast, AP, even Reddit threads, actually.
A real mix.
Yeah, and our goal for you listening is to really get a handle on the differences, the leadership styles, the potential maybe flashpoints between President Trump and this new Pope Leo the 14th, trying to understand their visions for the world.
And if you think about it, it's really looking at how different kinds of power work. What values are driving them. Both are influential, hugely so, but in such different ways.
Let's start with just how historic this is. I mean, it bears repeating two Americans, these specific global positions concurrently. It's unique.
It really is. And think about their domains. Traditionally very separate. President Trump, clearly political.
Yeah.
His whole platform, America First, focusing inward. Tariffs, let's say, assertive foreign policy.
Yeah, the sources consistently point to that focus on national interest, projecting strength.
Definitely. Strength, national interest. Key themes.
Now, set that against Pope Leo the 14th. His world is spiritual moral guidance for, like you said, over 1 billion people. The sources highlight his emphasis on unity, peace, inclusivity, compassion.
Which seem like, markedly different values compared to the political strategies we often see.
Right. And you can see it reflected in their styles, their personalities too, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. President Trump, very assertive, always wants the spotlight. Remember that AI Pope image?
Yeah, that was fast. Even before the mourning period for the last Pope was done, wasn't it?
Exactly. And his motto, or at least the one often associated with him, is fight. Very direct.
It fits the public image. But Pope Leo the Fourteenth, Cardinal Robert Prevost, as he was, sounds completely different. Descriptions are always, calm, thoughtful.
Focused on dialogue, service. And his first public word as Pope, peace. Just peace.
Reports from his time as a cardinal back that up, too. Quiet, reflective. It's a real study in contrast, just how they present themselves.
And those differences likely shape their values, maybe even their policy leanings. Trump's America First approach, we've seen it strain alliances sometimes. And his policies on immigration, the environment, they've had big impacts. Pope Leo's background, though, is so different. He spent decades as a missionary in Peru.
Working with marginalized communities, right. That must give him a completely different lens on global issues.
You'd have to think so. And his past comments, criticizing anti-immigrant talk, even specifically mentioning Vice President J.D. Vance, it points to a strong commitment to social justice, a wider, more global view. He'd criticized Trump's immigration stance before, too.
And that difference hasn't gone unnoticed, has it? Especially by President Trump and his supporters.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
It was pretty telling when President Trump went on Truth Social, basically claiming, some credit for the Pope's election because he believes he won the Catholic vote.
That sounds familiar, but it seems like some in the MAGA world, as the sources call it, they're looking at the new Pope with some suspicion.
Yeah, quite a bit, it seems. You see terms like anti-Trump, anti-MAGA, pro-open borders, even Marxist being thrown around in some circles.
Wow, Marxist.
And Steve Bannon predicted friction. He specifically mentioned Pope Leo's past criticisms of U.S. politicians.
So that raises the question, how might Trump react? There's even been talk in some of these discussions we looked at about potentially challenging the church's tax-exempt status.
Which would be a huge step, a major escalation.
Definitely. But let's look at what Pope Leo himself has actually done and said so far. His first moves seem almost designed to counter that kind of rhetoric.
I think you could argue that. His first greeting, peace be with you all, very powerful, echoing the risen Christ. And he immediately called for an end to war.
Mentioned Ukraine, Gaza specifically.
Yes, and India-Pakistan tensions too. Plus, he offered the Holy See as a place for enemies to meet, for dialogue. That's a significant gesture right out of the gate.
And his first press conference. Some read his comments about ending loud, forceful communication as, bit of a jab at Trump's style.
It's hard not to see it that way, maybe. A veiled critique, perhaps, especially when he followed up calling for unity, for listening to The Week.
And it was notable he spoke Italian first, wasn't it? Didn't really lean into his American roots initially.
Suggests global priorities from day one, I think. Which makes sense given his background. Born in Chicago, Robert Prevost, 69 years old, but a dual U.S.-Peru citizen.
Those decades in Peru as a missionary, that's a huge part of his life. That must have shaped him profoundly.
You'd imagine it gives him a much broader perspective on, well, everything. Humanity, power, religion, politics. Maybe makes him seem less caught up in the American political fray,
Could be an advantage on the world stage. So, despite all these differences, is there any common ground, anything at all?
Well, fundamentally, they're both American, both globally influential. That's undeniable.
Okay, sure.
They both use social media, different ways, different goals, but they use it. They both deal with the media, again, very different approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, Pope Leo opposes abortion. That's a position President Trump and Vice President Vance also hold. So there are a few specific points, even if the overall philosophies are worlds apart.
But this whole situation really spotlights the question of American influence globally, doesn't it? The first U.S.-born pope. What does that mean?
It's a huge question. Does it mean a different kind of American voice? Some hope it's a more inclusive one, working with global interests, maybe contrasting with how some perceive Trump's approach as working against them sometimes.
It was interesting that some American cardinals seemed keen to downplay his Americanness. One apparently said he's the least American of the American cardinals.
Right, underlining that his role now transcends nationality. And the sources are clear. The conclave's goal wasn't about picking someone to counter Trump. It was about finding a leader for the faith.
That's a crucial distinction.
Absolutely. And even their social media use, while both participate. Again, the contrast. Trump's constant, often provocative truth social posts. Pope Leo, not a big poster before, but then he quickly used the papal X account for those peace messages.
Almost mirroring Trump's speed in a way.
The speed, maybe, but the content and the tone, completely different, worlds apart.
So wrapping this deep dive up,
Yeah.
What are the main things for you, the listener, to take away?
I think the biggest thing is just how stark the contrast is. Same nationality, immense global influence. But President Trump and Pope Leo the Fourteenth represent fundamentally different leadership styles, values, and worldviews.
Trump's focus on national interests, that confrontational style, versus Pope Leo's emphasis on peace, unity, dialogue, that global perspective from his service.
Exactly. One is about projecting national strength, the other about, well, maybe projecting empathy and seeking common ground.
And understanding that fundamental difference is really key, isn't it, for navigating, the current global situation, seeing how political power and religious influence interact, or sometimes clash.
Which brings us to that final thought, something for you to mull over. We've seen the differences, the early reactions. Is that collision course, some predicted, actually likely? Will these two powerful Americans clash?
And if they do, what could that mean? For global politics, yeah, but also for the Catholic Church itself, especially its relationship with the U.S., it's definitely something to think about.